here for the YouTube people. So, hello everybody, it's good to be back here with you guys. It's been a little while. As I explained to the Discord, I was away, very busy, because of finals week. I actually have one more final, unfortunately, but I got through most of them. Thank you so much for your prayers. Continued prayers for the one tomorrow would be very much appreciated. I do have one more in international finance, which is basically just world Jewry. No, I'm just kidding. But it's a very interesting class. It talks a lot about how to manipulate exchange rates and interest rates and very, very fun stuff. So, in any case, thank you guys for joining me tonight. Well, I don't usually stream, but I wanted to make sure I got, all the streams in that I'm supposed to in a month. I have, the Patreons I gotta please. This is kind of like a part-time job, so if I take a sick day, I better take up an extra day, a different slot, or if that makes sense. To take up another slot a different day. And so that is why I'm streaming tonight here. I see a lot of new people, which is awesome. It's good to see some guys here. We got McPatty. This must be a special day for him. I'm assuming he's Irish. It is, after all, the feast of St. Patrick. It is the solemnity of St. Patrick, and it is a holy day of obligation, I believe, in Ireland. So today, sometime during your day, perhaps invoke St. Patrick to intercede for you for whatever intention you have. He is the patron saint of Ireland. And, I'll say more about, I was going to say more about St. Patrick's Day, but, I don't really have a lot of positive things to say about the Irish. So I don't really want to say a whole lot about it. Don't want to give them any credence. No, but for real though, actually St. Patrick was English. He was born in Great Britain. He was one of me. He wasn't one of you. Looking at all my American, Irish, followers, supporters. So yeah, he was Anglo. Actually, I don't know if he was Anglo-Saxon or not. He could have been Welsh or perhaps Scottish. But in any case, he was from Great Britain, and he was actually enslaved. I'm sure most people know these stories, but it doesn't hurt to repeat them. He was enslaved, brought to Ireland when he was a young boy. He was I believe a sheep herder, like a shepherd. He was very a hard worker. He escaped. He went back to his parents. He became a cleric, and then he traveled back to Ireland as a bishop to convert the people from paganism. Most famously, he is known for using a 3-leaf clover as an example to illustrate the 3 parts of the Trinity, though the God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are distinct persons, just as the 3 parts of the clover are distinct. They all represent one essence, which is God, just as all 3 parts of the clover represent one essence of the clover. There might be some issues with that analogy, just because one leaf of the clover, part of it isn't the whole clover, but in any case, it was pretty good for his time being. And so, yes, that is like one of the things he's known for. He's also known for, I think this is more apocryphal, casting out the snakes in Ireland. I think that's one of the reasons why there's not a lot of Jewish people living in Ireland to this day. A lot of the snakes got cast out there. No, again, jokes, guys. But overall, it is an important feast, especially for a lot of Irish Americans. And so just remember that on this day, to make sure it's not too much about the feasting part, use this as an excuse to get drunk, an excuse to get wasted. I actually would have drank some sake tonight. Not get wasted, of course, but I have a final tomorrow, like I mentioned, so I didn't think that would be too prudent. But in any case, remember the man behind the holiday. Okay, reflect on his life. Okay, yeah, Irish people are very, very, very questionable. I'll show this actually another time, but I got this really cool, this bowl that you heat up like hot water. You put the hot water in it, and then I have this flask that you put the sake in. And you place the flask with the sake in it inside the bowl. It's all ceramic, and then it heats it up, and that's how you drink hot sake. I figured out how to do it, and it's really good. Hot sake is a lot better than the cold stuff, but I'll have to do that another time, maybe Friday, perhaps Friday, since I'll be done with all my finals by then. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to the relief. All right. So hopefully everyone is having, a good day so far. And tonight we are going to be talking about indulgences, like the title suggests. Before I get into that, though, there's two things I wanted to bring up real quickly. One is that this is kind of just a status update on myself. Maybe you don't care, but I was having a very difficult time finding somewhere to go. All the Latin masses were being held like outdoors, and people had to stay in their cars, and they were a few hours away from me, and so it wasn't very desirable to travel all that way just to be sitting in my car. At such a distance, I couldn't really tell what was going on because it was a low mass anyway. And of course, I don't really particularly like attending the Novus Ordo Missa due to various liturgical abuses and other perhaps deficiencies, but that's kind of a story for another time. In any case, I found actually a Melkite Catholic. They're a Greek, or I think they're Greek Orthodox community that is in communion with Rome. They submit to Bishop of Rome, but their liturgy is based on that of Saint John Chrysostom. It's one of the oldest liturgies, in fact. Their spiritual practices are very Eastern, and I found a lot of comfort in that, especially like the Jesus prayer. It's not particularly Eastern. I think a lot of Catholics say it as well, but it's kind of I think it's more emphasized in Eastern spirituality and esotericism. So it was kind of a nice coupling of Catholic ecclesiology, which is superior, and I'll get into why I think that, and then as well as like Eastern mysticism and esotericism it has a nice appeal to it. In any case, they have like a secret underground mass they're doing, and I've been going to that, and it's been very spiritually fulfilling, I have to say. So it's just a status update on myself there. So yes, if you can find masses like those, I highly recommend going to them, because then you can receive the communion on the tongue. And the Novus Ordo mass, they were only receiving it on the hand, so I wasn't receiving communion. And so yes, that's what I would recommend to people if they can. Hopefully, all these lockdown craziness will end soon. At least in California, I'm referring to. For me, at least where I live. I don't know where you live and what your situation is like. Okay, but in any case, moving beyond that, I wanted to talk about probably what may be, I guess you could say, surprisingly good news, but it really shouldn't be that surprising if we have a solid faith, a solid foundation in the indefectibility of the church. And that piece of good news, of course, and I think everyone has heard about this, is that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, he signed off on a decree, I think put out by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, basically rejecting the notion that Catholic priests could bless a same-sex union. And of course, this was a bit of controversy, considering that the Pope had said some things related to the subject, which I believe I went over this in another stream. They were taken, for the most part, out of context, it seemed. There was also, the Pope has perhaps done some things that you may question where the Pope's mindset is at. But regardless of all of that, he has signed this off. He has said in the document that same-sex unions, quote, are not ordered to the Creator's plan. Very true. It says acknowledging those unions is, quote, illicit. And it says that God cannot bless sin. All this, of course, is true. We know this. And I think it also refers to homosexuality as a choice somewhere. I saw that in a different news article. And of course, this is all 100% true. The church can in no way, shape, or form sign off, encourage, induce other people to commit abominations in the eyes of God, perversions of their sexual faculties, things which cry out for vengeance from God, because these are things that are distorting the natural purpose of our sexual organs, the natural law. So yes, it makes sense, of course, that shouldn't be too surprising given the church's history of affirming theology and affirming natural law theory. But of course, the media lost their minds. I think we saw a lot of people on Twitter got very upset by this. They thought the Pope was some revolutionary, and despite, some of the, perhaps you could say, I want to be very careful in the way as I say this, but perhaps some of the scandal Pope Francis may have caused, in the end, I think he's still, with it. He's still being protected by God, I think, to keep from legislating or mandating something that would be evil. Perhaps you could say that the magisterium itself has been protected, I think is the way I'm trying to get at this here. All right. So yes, I hope that ye did not have little faith, as Jesus said to his apostles, he calls them ye of little faith. I hope you guys were not of that sort. I hope you remembered that God is steadfast to his church, and he gave the keys to Peter, the keys to the kingdom of heaven. That was his sign, the indelible sign that the church would be indefectible to the end of the age, and that the magisterium is not going to be, I would say, blatantly trying to lead people down the wrong direction. And I'm glad that this is affirmed again. Thank you for mentioning my pillows. Thank you for the compliments. Yeah, I said this in the Discord, right? Very true, Doctor. Did you trust the plan? In this case, it's God's plan, and this is the only plan that you should be trusting dogmatically. America First is, I'm sure, a great movement. I'm sure it is a great movement. And, I believe that it has a lot of solubility, but it's still fallible. And that isn't a criticism of America First whatsoever. I'm just stating it's fallible, like most things are. But the church is infallible. It is it was created by God. And so that is why we have this dogmatic assurance that it will prevail to the end. So that is something, we must remember. And that is kind of the essence of what faith is. Faith isn't something that is irrational, as Thomas Aquinas says. It's not something that is, there's many different, ways people have tried to perceive faith. I think some people have said it's like this irrationality, suspense of the intellect. That's not at all what it means. It's not a blindness. It's not like this blind following, but rather it is like fidelity. It is a loyalty. It is this profound trust that that which God has revealed through Jesus, through special revelation, through general revelation, as I say, through nature, is truly that which what represents the will of God, the intent of God. It is a trust that when God says that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church, that is true. We can be assured that is a fact, and that it will live on until the end of time. And it will continue to minister to souls and do what is right. So yes, I know it can be difficult at times to have that faith. It can be very difficult at times to remember that and to be comforted by that fact, because sometimes it seems like the church is on the verge of capsizing. I think there's like some nautical term. It's like veering over. There's some term in which it almost capsizes, but doesn't quite get there. There's often times in which we experience that, but we have to remember that at this current moment, the church is going through what I think some theologians have called listing. Thank you. Yes, it's listing. Her passion, and the church, of course, is united to Christ in marriage. That is the analogy Paul gives. St. Paul gives that analogy. And so like Christ, the church is going to have to undergo her passion just as Christ underwent his passion. This is a very painful time, but we have to remember that just as Christ came out, was resurrected into glory from his passion from the crucifixion, so too will the church. And those who abandon the church now, they are not going to be worthy of the church when she is in her glory and in her majesty. Those who have given up on her will not deserve the church when she is going to be resurrected and going to be at her full power and strength, which I have 100% confidence in will occur. Because, of course, faith is one of the, key virtues. Faith, hope, and charity. So this is something, very important to emphasize there. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Listing, I know that word. I've heard it many times. It just slipped my mind there. Okay, so hopefully you guys didn't become like an ortho cuck, okay? So yeah, just remember that the church is indefectible. And yes, she will one day be resurrected as the shining city on the hill, just like she was at the beginning in the early church history, and in various times. The church has kind of gone through a cycle. Church has had corruption and issues, and then it's had like this reformation to it. The last time was probably Pope Pius X. He did a lot to reform the church, to make it more steadfast. And the time before that was probably the Counter-Reformation of the Council of Trent. You can point to a few other times, but the church will, again, have a rebirth. All right. One of the things, though, I actually did want to bring up about this unique situation is that it kind of reminds us about the supremacy of the church's magisterium, juxtaposed against, for example, the Eastern Orthodox magisterium. And what I mean by this is that the Eastern Orthodox, they haven't had an ecumenical council since, I believe, the last one that they recognized, the Council of Nicaea, which was in 787 AD. So it's been a little while since they've had an ecumenical council. Why is this? Is because the structure of the Eastern Orthodox Church is fundamentally divided, and while it's not as divided as Protestants, it is still divided insofar as these patriarchs are often acting in what's called autocephaly. Certainly that is the case right now with the Byzantines and the Greeks, the Ukrainians and the Russians. They are acting in autocephaly. That was like the newest developments, but several of them are acting kind of independently of each other. And so because of that reason, they lack a unity, this united structure to them, which makes it very difficult to convene and to sort out some of these issues that modern man is faced with. And so this is, very important to hold councils or to have some way of mandating to the whole church about the church's interpretation or the church's stance on some issue, because the issues change and they develop based on the circumstances at hand. When the church was undergoing the Arian heresy, it was very necessary to have something like the Council of Nicaea to clarify what the church meant by the Trinity. What it meant by that that Jesus was all God, but he was also a God with remainder, that it wasn't a God transmorgifying into Jesus. And so there's like a lot of debate and discussion there. And so we are presented today in this contemporary age with these new, innovations and ways to kind of repackage sodomy, such as civil unions and what have you. And so the church is faced now with having to come up with some stance on this. Contraception is another example. And the Orthodox Church, unfortunately, doesn't have the structure to actually say something to their whole community. Certain patriarchs certainly could, but certain patriarchs could also go the opposite direction as well. It is conceivable, it is possible that the Greek patriarch, the patriarch in Greece, the Greek Orthodox patriarch, whoever it might be, I forget who it is now, but they are known for being quite liberal. In fact, I believe they affirm contraception as permissible, and so it's very possible that maybe they will affirm, the Greek patriarch, that civil unions are perfectly legitimate, they're perfectly fine, and there won't be any way to really hash this out or to settle this simply because there is no way for the Orthodox to get anything done. And why can't they hold a ecumenical council? Well, because there's no one singular figure who stands above all the patriarchs who can say, okay, it's time to convene a council. It's time to convene a council, and this is the means and the measure by which we can decide on something. The Orthodox Church is in division, and so that gives it quite a bit of issues. Yeah. Let me just take a drink of water here, and let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. So yes, the need for like a pope, the need for someone who represents Christ on earth, someone who can speak as Christ would speak, because of course Christ is not with us, but we would need some physical person to kind of give the church direction. And so that is, the job of the pope. He's the vicar of Christ, and his supremacy and the supremacy of Rome is inviolable. And that is again demonstrated for us so piously with these new acclamations. And it's a good day to be a Catholic, I would say. It's a good day to be Catholic, to be reminded of the Pope's importance and supremacy. He is not the first among equals, as the Easterners would like to say. Rather, he has a supremacy, and he has demonstrated it once more, and in the importance of it once more. Okay. Oh, the Prots are much worse, much worse. It seems even, it seems almost like a non sequitur to bring up Protestantism in relation to this. They don't even have a table at the debate, it seems almost. When it comes to the church being one holy Catholic and apostolic, it seems they lack all of those. Particularly apostolic. At least the Eastern Orthodox have a continuous line since the early church. They have a continuous lineage from the apostles, but unfortunately they are in schism right now. So hopefully, like the Melkites, the Orthodox will return to home. They'll return and accept the Pope and Vicar of Christ. And they can keep, they can keep some of their stuff, but they just need to learn how to submit. That's just part of being, right wing, or part of being, I wouldn't even say right wing, I would just say part of being a person, a human, is recognizing hierarchy. There's always going to be hierarchy. And that is why it's very important to have a hierarchy, even within the church, to have someone at the top. Okay. Very true, Requiem. He says an ecumenical council for Protestants is when they go to their pastor's house for dinner. I don't even think they recognize. I think some of them, the Reformed, the Lutherans, and the Anglicans they recognize, I think, maybe the first 4 ecumenical councils or something like that. But that's it. And they think they're all subordinate to Scripture, which is kind of odd, because he was at the Council of Hippo and the Council of Carthage when the Scripture, the canon, was codified. Otherwise, there was, quite a bit of ambiguity and uncertainty as to what belongs in the Bible. Which books should we include and which shouldn't we? There was quite a bit of debate on that subject. It wasn't at all clear which ones were infallible and which weren't. There was, I think the second book of James, they were debating on it, including that. The Epistle of Barnabas, I think, was another one they were debating. There was other apocryphal works, like the Gospel of Thomas, I think was another one. In any case, there was also the Book of Jude. That one was really, I think, debated whether that belongs. And I think Revelation was another one. In any case, or the Apocalypse. In any case, that's another discussion for another time. But the Protestants are. What reason at this point do you have to be Protestant? Because Protestants, they can not only say that civil unions are perfectly fine, they can go all the way. They can just go all the way and say, that gay marriage is fine. We've already seen it. There's gay clergy now in the Episcopal and I think Methodist circles, maybe even some Presbyterian circles, and there's the craziness that we see, and it makes sense. Protestantism is fundamentally built on individualism. It's fundamentally built on the rejection of a higher authority, some intermediary between God and man. It rejects this. Now, it doesn't go as far as modern man, the liberal democracy, to reject all authority besides the individual, but it's basically has limited it. It's restricted it, and quite arbitrarily. And why I think Protestantism will eventually just commit self-suicide. It's just going to shoot itself in the foot for that reason. It's going to lead to secularism, and we've already seen pretty much that happening. And just like, if individualism is basically just an extension of some form of materialism, and just as material objects are infinitely divisible, they can be divided forever, so too is the Protestant Church. It is being infinitely divided because there is no unity. There is no unified structure. And this unity cannot just be some invisible unity. It must be comprehensive. It must be concrete. Okay. So if you're Protestant, hopefully you'll come home to the church. Please. Alright. Hopefully Jake Lloyd will come home. That is, we need to pray for that guy. Alright. So tonight we're talking about indulgences. Speaking of Protestantism, this is probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks for Protestants to become Catholic. Though you should never become Catholic because you agree with one dogma or don't. But in any case, this is probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks for Protestants, and probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of the Catholic faith, I would say. Even among Catholics, I don't think a lot of them take advantage of indulgences. And so that's what we're going to be discussing tonight here. And I kind of have to preface this by rehashing some of the stuff I brought up last week about temporal punishment. And I think some of the stuff I brought up in my topic on penance. It's on YouTube. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend you go back. You should subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you should definitely watch that one on penance. I go through a lot of Bible verses and philosophy. I'll quickly summarize it, but in any case, definitely check that out. Now that I remembered, I brought the YouTube channel. Let me just plug real quickly the entropy link. I always plug it at the most awkward moments, but I have to remind people I do have an entropy link. It does help to fund the show and whatnot. But so there's that. If you want to ask me questions or what have you. So what about penance? What is it, and how does it relate to indulgences? All right. Remember, this is a key distinction that we made between guilt and punishment. Someone can be guilty of something, and that means they've been condemned by a judge, and then because they've been condemned, therefore they have to pay some punishment for that. And those two things can often be separate, and I'll get into what I mean by that. And when it comes to particularly God, he is a God of what they call retributive justice. Or distributive justice, rather. He distributes to distributive justice. He distributes to everyone according to their merits, according to their demerits. And so if you besmirch the honor of God, then you must pay some price. The same way if I was to take a bat and hit a baseball through someone's window, I would have to pay for that damage. I would have to pay for the damage there. And if I was incapable of making satisfaction for that damage, then I would have to go to debtor's prison, or I would have to pay some form of punishment to exact some satisfaction for that. If I can't provide satisfaction, there must be some satisfaction through punishment. And that's very key detail there. And so when it comes to the moral order of things, there's what you might call the moral order or the eternal order. And when we sin, we have kind of created this disequilibrium in which we have disrupted the harmony, the natural harmony between ourselves and the moral order, and for that reason there must be some satisfaction made. At the same time, there's also the temporal order in which we live in, and when we sin, we also disrupt the temporal order of things. When we treat other people not as an end, without treating them with respect and the dignity, we have, treated them as like a tool or an instrument for our own means, and for that reason, we have disrupted the temporal order of things. When we treat ourselves that way, or we violate the duties to ourselves or to others, we are creating this disequilibrium between ourselves and the way the world ought to be, the temporal order according to the natural law, according to right reason, and therefore there must be some temporal punishment, or there must be some temporal satisfaction. And so we have, on one end, the temporal satisfaction must be met, and then at the other end, we also have, there must be some eternal satisfaction as well. Now, when it comes to the eternal satisfaction, which relates primarily to our disposition and the way that it relates to God, we are fundamentally corrupted. We have a propensity to commit evil. I have often used the term the general maxim, which is just to say that a policy of the will is one which is fundamentally disoriented. It prefers, and it will always give a primacy to our own inclinations, our own desires. We'll place it above obeying the moral law, obeying God. And so given an infinite number of opportunities to sin, and so long as our inclinations are above our inclinations are above whatever the moral law is, we will violate the moral law. Now, hopefully that made sense. And for that reason, we are infinitely guilty of violating the moral law, and therefore there must be some infinite satisfaction made, otherwise we suffer eternal conscious torment in hell. So, how can infinite satisfaction be made? Well, certainly we cannot make that satisfaction, at least according to St. Anselm, it's not possible for us to do it, and therefore that's why our Christ comes in. And Christ was infinitely obedient to God, and this, I guess I'll get into this in another talk about we call these kind of these theories of atonement, these models of atonement. And so Christ, through his infinite obedience to God, he has glorified God, he has restored honor to God, even though we have besmirched it. He has restored the honor to God, and therefore our sins can now be expiated when we are united to Christ. When we are united to Christ, Christ becomes therefore liable for our sins, he now pays for our debts, and now we are forgiven and absolved. And this occurs, of course, in baptism, and if we commit mortal sin later on in life, we just talked about this, you have to go to confession. Alright, so we're all on the same page there. Just a quick reminder, I brought this up a few times, but it's important to bring it up again. Now, when it comes to temporal punishment, Christ expects us to suffer along with him. There's a great verse in Matthew 16:24 when Jesus told his disciples that if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And so by conjoining ourselves to Christ in baptism, Christ living within us, transforming us, we also have to be like Christ. And so to be like Christ is to suffer like Christ did. And for that reason, we have to make some satisfaction for the temporal punishment of our iniquities. And the way we do that is through penance. And we talked about the major forms of penance: prayer, works of mercy or almsgiving, and fasting. And that is a very important thing to remember during Lent, especially because this is a time where we highlight the need for penance. And so that is, something important there. And so if we are, going off this idea of temporal punishment, there is also this concept of merit. And merit is when if you've lived a fairly sinless life based on the grace of God, cooperating with the grace of God, you've lived, a very holy life, and so then you suffer for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, or you commit penance, works of righteousness, you gain what's called merit in heaven, these treasures in heaven, which according to Christ, dust nor moth will destroy or ruin, unlike the treasures of earth. And so the church teaches that these treasures are stored for us in like this celestial treasure chest. These merits of the saints, the merits of the Virgin Mary, the merits of even Christ, because Christ's merits are infinite, are all stored in this treasure chest, which, according to Jesus, is accessible to the church. And Jesus even says in Matthew 16:19-20, and I will give thee, talking to the apostles, talking to the first bishops of the church, I will give thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever thou shalt bind on earth, thou shalt be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And there, actually, he was talking to St. Peter, but he also gives kind of a general dispensation to all his apostles later on in Matthew, where he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And so this kind of gives a broad power, a broad jurisdiction to the church to use those merits for those people on earth. And what I mean by that is that we can, I'm just checking the chat here, making sure I didn't miss anything that you guys had asked. All right, so it looks like we're all on the same page, which is good. Okay. All right, so what does it mean, though, to have this treasure chest of merit? Why does that matter? And what does it mean that the church has access to it? Okay. It is important because we often, sin, and we have the temporal punishment. And so instead of performing penance, we can also, the church has been so generous, and God has been so generous to allow this, to use the satisfaction of those who've come before us, to use the merits of those who have died and whose merits are now stored in heaven for us. We can now apply that to our lives. Now it is very important, and this is why I have the catechism here, to discuss particularly what is necessary to receive an indulgence, because indulgence is something very specific. But that is kind of the general idea there. And probably the best analogy to it would be like if you were in debtor's prison and your brother or your mom came to bail you out. That is probably the best analogy I can think of, because we all share, and just as your mom shares in your physical family, your physical immediate family, you have some connection to her. In the same way, we all share in the mystical body of Christ. Everyone on earth in the church militant, everyone in heaven the church triumphant, and therefore we are all connected, and therefore the merits of one person can be applied to the deficiencies of another. A great verse, I really love this verse, and it's often people believe Jesus is talking about purgatory here. A lot of the early church fathers, the patristic fathers, spoke about this that way. In Matthew 25-26 says, reconcile quickly with your adversary while you are still on the way to court. Otherwise, he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown in prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Protestants often think that Jesus is referring to hell, but it doesn't make sense because he says you will not get out until you paid the last penny. You can't get out of hell. It's eternal, so that doesn't really make sense. It makes much more sense that it says reconcile with your adversary quickly. In other words, make sure you do penance by reconciling yourself with others, restoring the temporal harmony there. Otherwise, you will have to undergo some form of punishment in purgatory if the punishment is not met on earth. And so basically, the same way it says you have to pay every last penny, the way you can think of the pennies is like the merits. And so the merits of the saints are like these pennies that are basically bailing us out here. So, what does the Catechism have to say about indulgences? Alright, so we are on lesson 33. It says, an indulgence is the remission granted by the Church of the temporal punishment due to sins already forgiven. And now that is a very important line there, because Protestants often have the misunderstanding, the misconception, that indulgences forgive sins. That's not true. Indulgences save you from hell. Again, not true. It says nothing to do with the eternal punishment or eternal guilt of your sins. It is presupposed, in order to receive an indulgence, that you are already forgiven of the eternal guilt and the eternal punishment, that you are in a state of grace, and it is also presupposed that you've gone to confession for a plenary indulgence. I'll get into what I mean by that. But it is nothing to do with damnation or hell. It doesn't expiate that whatsoever. It only remits the temporal punishment due to sin. And you have to be in a state of grace to receive an indulgence. That's what the Catechism says here. An indulgence can produce its effects in the soul only after sins are forgiven, and in the case of mortal sins, only after the eternal punishment is taken away. So again, you have to go to confession. That means, as we talked about last time, by an indulgence, the Church merely wipes out or lessens the temporal punishment due to sins already forgiven. That is very emphasized, simply because the Protestants have such a vast misunderstanding of what indulgences do. And Protestants often make the argument that indulgences encourage laziness or spiritual laxity, because then people think they can sin with impunity, then they just get indulgence. When in fact it is the opposite. An indulgence induces people to go to confession. An indulgence will induce people to even receive Holy Communion, because they receive a plenary indulgence, you have to receive Holy Communion. It induces people to pray for the Holy Father. And these things are very important. To receive an indulgence, you have to do those things. These are, of course, very important to our faith and to our spiritual lives. And so it is actually the opposite of what I think Protestants have in mind. An indulgence is encouraging people to be more holy. That is why they exist. All right. And when it comes to the history of indulgences, because it sounds like something that was invented in medieval Europe in order to scam people out of money, I will get into the practice of quote-unquote selling indulgences. I will go into some of the misunderstandings there and some of the, mythology that Protestants have created when it comes to that issue. But in any case, it does have a historical basis, the granting of indulgences. In the early days of the Church, according to the Catechism, up until the 6th century, indulgences generally took the form of a lessening of public penances opposed for sins. And like we talked about when it came to confession, after you do a confession, a priest will give a penance. In the early days of the Church, they were very strict about these penances. I believe there was one penance I remember reading about for some king, I forget who, and I think he killed his brother or something really horrific like that. And the penance was that at every Mass, or he had to say the act of contrition to every single person who walked through the church. And it was like some nobleman. And so this was a very severe penance because he had to publicly do it. Penance was very public back then. And so the penance would be very severe. And this was their way of helping to discipline people and help create and fashion, spiritual resilience against sin in the future, as well as, again, to expiate the temporal punishment of sin, to make satisfaction for it. And so the way that this could be lessened, these very severe penances, was for them to visit someone who's going to be martyred. In the early centuries, writes the Catechism, it was customary for those who were to be martyred to ask that indulgences be granted to certain individuals. Someone would go up to someone who is about to be martyred and say, oh, could you grant me an indulgence so that my penance can be lessened? And say, sure. And so then they're basically applying their martyrdom. Martyrdom is, this very serious form of penance. It's, you're dying for the faith. You're suffering unto death for the faith. You're literally walking the footsteps of Christ when he says, take up your cross and follow me. And for that reason, it was believed that this was going to be some form of merit and therefore could be applied to other members of the church. There are verses in the Old Testament that seem to imply some form of indulgence. I will get into that, I think, later. But for now, let me talk about the kinds of indulgences, of which there are two, plenary and partial. And let me just get a drink of water real quickly. All right. I see some great discussion in chat. If you have any questions, again, you can ask me through the entropy link, or I will probably open it up to everyone at the end of my discussion, at the end of the theology lecture, or what have you. So make sure you save your questions, because it looks like you guys have some good ones. Okay, so a plenary indulgence is the remission of the temporal punishment due to our sins. It is basically the remission of all of the temporal punishment. That's what it means by plenary. A plenary indulgence, unless otherwise expressly stated, can be gained only once a day. Even though the prescribed work be performed several times. And it says, unless otherwise stated, because there's a huge exception. A huge exception I think a lot of people might know about, and that is on All Souls Day. On All Souls Day, you can gain an indulgence as many times as you want, so long as the usual conditions apply. Plus, you have to say 6 Our Fathers, 6 Hail Marys, and 6 Glory Bees, and they receive a plenary indulgence. And the reason why, and then you also have to be either in a church or a cemetery, some form of public oratory or semi-public oratory. And then every time you do that, you can receive an indulgence. And the reason why is because the church also believes that just as it can dispense an indulgence to us, we can also ask God piously to apply an indulgence to someone who has died and is now in purgatory, so that they may be remitted of their temporal punishment and be freed and go to heaven. Now, the church has jurisdiction of everyone on earth. Only God has jurisdiction over those in purgatory, so we don't have 100% knowledge that God will, necessarily take up that indulgence, but we piously believe, we piously hope that he will, apply the merit. And for that reason, on All Souls Day, November 2nd, you should go into a public cemetery, make sure, okay, I gotta say the usual conditions first. Make sure you satisfy the usual conditions. Go to some Catholic cemetery, and say 6 Our Father, 6 Hail Marys, 6 Glory Bees to every single member of your deceased family that you can think of who is Catholic, who expressed some Catholic interest, or who was Christian and maybe was ignorant of the Catholic Church, and then maybe perhaps just walk along, and if you see someone who strikes your eye, because I don't think you could. There's thousands of people in cemeteries, so it'd be hard to say, in plenary indulgence for every single one, but you could, theoretically. But yes, that's a great time to do it. It's a great spiritual exercise. I highly, highly exhort people to do that. And I'm speaking just as much to you as I am to myself. It's something I want to get better at. I haven't done, I think I did that maybe like 3 years ago, but the last 2 years I did not do that, so I need to do better when it comes to trying to apply indulgences for those who have deceased. And that is why we have Mass for the dead, is because they, we really do believe in purgatory. It's a real thing. And it's not, it's punishment. And so we want people to be free from it as soon as possible. All right. And now here are the conditions ordinarily prescribed for gaining a plenary indulgence. And it's usually under the familiar phrase, the usual conditions apply. For example, let me just make sure you can see here, this thing, okay, I'm always really bad at doing like the The mirrored image. Okay, that thing right there, that picture frame contains in it the Angelus. It is something that you can pray 3 times a day, and according to that picture frame on the bottom, it says that you can gain an plenary indulgence if you say the Angelus every single day for a month. And then it says the usual conditions apply, in like parentheses. And so what are the usual conditions? Well, the usual conditions are 1, you have to have attended confession either 8 days before or 8 days after receiving the indulgence. And it's very important to note that you still have to be in a state of grace. You always have to be in a state of grace, but it's always it's like an extra step to say that you have to have attended confession within like 8 days of receiving the indulgence, either before or after. The second requirement is communion. You have to have received Holy Communion, again, 8 days, I believe, before and after again. And then it says like the octave, that's the word they use in the catechism. And then finally, a visit to a church or public oratory, or even a semi-public oratory, which is like a Catholic cemetery, and in certain cases. Okay, and then the last requirement is a prayer for the intentions of the Supreme Pontiff. Usually when it says a prayer for the intentions of the Supreme Pontiff, that means 1 Our Father, 1 Hail Mary, 1 Glory Be. Glory be is the glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. That's the glory be, in case perhaps you are not familiar with that terminology. So those are like the prayers, and when you pray them, make sure you pray them piously, thinking about the intentions of the Holy Father. And so the Church, the Supreme Pontiff, has said, if you think about me in prayer, if you pray for me, then I will grant you an indulgence. It's basically a way the Church can encourage people to pray for the Pope and to live pious lives. Okay. What is a partial? Oh, actually, you know what? I'll read through here some of the examples that they have of plenary indulgences that they give. Those who piously recite a third part of the Rosary, which is to say 5 decades. Originally, rosaries were 15 decades, but I think most people just say 5 now. In the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, publicly exposed or even reserved in the tabernacle, may gain a plenary indulgence on condition of confession and communion. And regular conditions apply there. Other examples, again, the Angelus, if you pray it every single day for a month. The faithful who recites devoutly the prayer, Behold, O good and sweetest Jesus, before an image of Jesus Christ crucified, may gain a plenary indulgence under the usual conditions. And then the last one they use as an example here is the faithful who, at least with a contrite heart, either singly or in company, perform the pious exercises of the way of the cross, when the latter has been legitimately erected according to the prescriptions of the Holy See, as to say, just like the according to the prayers that the Holy See has said, like you have to pray when you're performing the Stations of the Cross, may gain a plenary indulgence as often as they perform the same, and another plenary indulgence if they receive Holy Communion on the same day, or even within a month after having made the Stations 10 times. During Lent, this is a great time to pray the Stations of the Cross. I know a lot of churches, a lot of parishes will do this. With COVID, this may be disrupted, but you can do it at home, you can do it in church, whatever it might be. But as long as you meet the usual conditions, pray the Stations of the Cross, the ways of the cross, you can receive a plenary indulgence. And I should mention that you also have to have some intent to receive, a baseline intent to receive an indulgence. If perhaps you were ignorant of what indulgences are and now you just realize what they are, it is not the case that they have been applying to you secretly. And that is one of the reasons why in a lot of morning prayers, you'll see it starts with, may I gain all the indulgences attached to the prayers I shall say, and the good works I shall perform this day. And that line is something helpful to pray every single morning so that you can gain whatever indulgences may be attached to the prayers you say. And so just a general disposition of wanting to receive whatever indulgences you can satisfies the requirement to intend to receive them. Okay. What is a partial indulgence? A partial indulgence is the remission of parts of the temporal punishment due to our sins. And then this is like an old thing. This has been done away with after the Second Vatican Council. It says here in this catechism, to say that indulgence of so many days or years is granted, it means that the amount of temporal punishment is remitted, which, in the sight of God, would have been remitted by so many days or years of penance in the early church. And what it means by that is there's, for example, here's some great examples here. If you I think it's if you study the Bible for 30 minutes, then you can receive a plenary indulgence of like 300 days. Here's an example, an indulgence of 500 days for saying the ejaculation. Okay, and the word ejaculation in this context is like this holy invocation. It invokes the Spirit of God. Holy, 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 Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of thy glory. That's a funny word, isn't it? In any case, that is when it says that, it means like a holy invocation. Okay. I don't know where your mind went, but that's what it means in the catechism there. Okay, gotta be serious. I'm an adult. I have to be serious. Gotta keep a straight face here. But when it says the 300 days, that does not mean you get 300 days out of purgatory. That was a very common misunderstanding. In fact, it was a misunderstanding that I myself believed for the longest time. Like, I would read some older book before Vatican II, and it would say, oh, if you study piously the scriptures, or you study piously the Catholic faith, Pope Leo XIII has been so generous to offer an indulgence of 15 days. And I thought, oh, great, 15 days less in purgatory? Sounds good to me. But no, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is that the indulgence, the partial indulgence granted, is equivalent to 15 days of penance, as would be prescribed in like the early church. That's what it means. After the Second Vatican Council, Pope Paul VI, for the reasons kind of I mentioned, did away with that. I think that the nomenclature was just a little bit too confusing for people, and so now they just say it's a partial indulgence. A partial indulgence that is really easy to gain is if you say the Angelus 3 times a day. If you say the Angelus 3 times a day, you gain a partial indulgence, as long as you're in a state of grace. And why do you have to be in a state of grace? I don't know if I mentioned this, but the reason why is because you must be united to the person whose merits you are receiving. The person whose merits you're receiving, of course, was in a state of grace, but otherwise you can't gain merits. You can't be dead and gain life. You have to be alive to gain merit, to gain treasure, to be in communion with God. And so therefore, to be united to this person in order to receive the benefits that they themselves, whatever saint it may be, won and are contained now in the treasure chest, this treasure trove in heaven, you must be united to that person in the mystical body of Christ. And to do so means that to be in a state of grace. And that is the purpose and intent behind, or the reason why, rather, you have to be in a state of grace to receive an indulgence. Okay. Oh, I wanted to say about partial indulgences, and this is not really brought up in the catechism, and it's kind of unfortunate, because this is kind of like an important detail about them, but I wrote it down in my notes here. And there are 3 kind of main ways to receive a partial indulgence, besides like the prayers they mention. They mention several prayers, ejaculations, as they call them. But the first way is to pray continuously. And what I mean by this, and this is something that has been very confusing to people, what Paul says, to pray without ceasing. What did he mean by this? And it means that we have to have a disposition which is always lifted up towards God, so that every even menial task that we do, implicitly or explicitly, is done for the sake, for the glory, for the kingdom of God. So long as that is like on our heart, that our heart always desires to be with God, to worship God, to glorify God. When we are in this state, we are in this state of constantly praying without ceasing, this state of pure esotericism, meaning like this inward state in which we are fully cognizant of the fact that Christ is living within us. And when we are in a state of grace, that is true, that Christ is within us. We oftentimes think of our spirit in this very Platonic sense, or in the Cartesian sense, that there's our body, there's our physical body, and then there's like a soul. The soul is like this guy who's driving the car, and then the physical body is kind of just like this, like a mecha, or like something like a robot or something like that. Like he's in the driver's seat, the spirit. But that is a very grossly inaccurate way to understand the soul. The soul is kind of like embodied, meaning it's united with the body. And it's the reason why the body and the soul are going to resurrect together on the last day. The two need each other. The soul is kind of like this immaterial aspect to ourselves. I do not believe in this reductionism that we can reduce all of consciousness and intentionality to simply physical processes. Ed Feser has great proofs for this, the immateriality of the mind. But in any case, the mind is kind of like this, the form, or it is like the structuring principle, and then our experiences, the way we live our life, helps to fill in this, to define who we are. You can say like the I. When I say I think, what do we mean by the I? Well, that's what we refer to ourselves. It is the self-consciousness. And so it is like this embodied soul. And so that, in other words, without going too deep into the philosophy, I can go do that another time. In other words, Christ is living within us in our very flesh and blood. And that is why he had to become flesh and blood, so that he could be united to us. And that is also why Christ had to rise from the dead, so that we too can rise from the dead on the last day at the final judgment. Our body and soul will rise from the dead, because when Christ is in us, Christ has the power to do that. Since he has done it already, he has freed us from the bondages of sin. All right, so to be cognizant of the fact that Christ is at our very fingertips, which is something that, oftentimes we don't think about, but Christ is at our very fingertips, it kind of compels us to always have God on our heart, always have God on our lips, so that every word we say, every thought we have will be pleasing to God and will always be something that is lifted up towards him. And so when we do this, we receive a partial indulgence according to the church. And the way in which we enter into this state is through contemplation, is through the prayers called ejaculations, or these holy invocations, these traditional invocations. For example, let me just give you a few examples here that they use, like the Holy, Holy, Holy One, or, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I love that prayer. It's very similar to the Jesus prayer. The Jesus prayer is, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner." And contained with that, in that prayer, it's a very Eastern prayer, is pretty much the entire essence of the gospel, and really is the disposition that we ought to have, this one of humility and begging God for mercy. And it's one that our people often will repeat many times. It's very meditative. It's very, in some ways, kind of similar to the Japa Yoga of Hinduism, in which they repeat the name, I think, of like some holy thing in order to have some meditative experience. I don't know. I don't really care. But it's something that can help to excite in our bosom piety. And so when we have, do these invocations, we receive partial indulgence. The second way is through corporal works. For example, feeding the poor, comforting those who are afflicted, those who have disease or sickness, and then instructing the ignorant. That's something, I'm doing right now. I'm instructing the ignorant, you guys, the ignorant masses. I have to instruct you, teach you. No, I'm kidding. That's very condescending. No, that's a joke. But yes, instructing the ignorant, being like that's the words that they use, by the way. That is not my wording. That is the way that they talk about it, is instructing the ignorant, which is, teaching people, instructing them on proper living and what have you. But no, that was a joke. That was very condescending. I apologize. And then the final way is through abstinence of something that is pleasing to you and is permitted. And that is important because, we're in Lent right now. So there's a lot of things that are going to be not permitted, like meat on Fridays, or, okay, why do I see swastikas in chat? Yeah, mods, where are you? I mod people. You need to ban these guys. Okay. Where was I? Very distracting. Okay. Abstinence of things that we might enjoy. For example, you might enjoy wine. You might enjoy plum wine if you're me. And if you abstain from drinking wine or something that is pleasing to you, and it's not a day of fasting according to the calendar of the church. In other words, it's voluntary. That's what I'm getting at. It's not an involuntary sacrifice. It's it's a voluntary sacrifice, then it is pleasing to God, and therefore you receive a partial indulgence. And honestly, fasting is something that we should get in the habit of doing. Regardless of whether or not we receive a partial indulgence, we need to get in the habit of trying to fast. Because fasting is like this spiritual discipline. And I hope Rem Representative is listening, because he has encouraged me to get stronger. I was not the strongest fellow in the room, and so when you start, when I started, I could maybe do a few push-ups, but not that many, like maybe one or two, not too many. But if you do it every single day, you begin to build up resilience, and then you can start doing more and more, and after a week you can maybe do 50 or so forth and so on. And so in a very similar sense, in our own spiritual lives, if we have self-discipline in small things, it helps to build us up. If, for example, you're hungry and you go down and you open the refrigerator door and you see a Whataburger, or no, you wouldn't see it in the refrigerator, I guess, unless you've kept it cold. But I'm trying to appeal to my audience here, because I know they like Whataburgers, apparently. But if you like to say you're driving and you're hungry, and you see like McDonald's and they have the fish fillet, which it's a Friday, or you see a Whataburger and they have the Whataburger, and so you have to make a choice of which you're going to go to, and so you choose, of course, to go to get the fish fillet, since it's Friday and you need to abstain from meat. And that decision you make there is helping to crystallize your self-discipline. And it's the way you cooperate with God's grace. According to Augustine, I think it was Augustine. Bro, do the mods suck? Why is this? Are you guys incapable of banning people or something? Oh my goodness, you guys are incredibly impotent, I have to say. I hate to be rude, but it's this has gone on for quite a bit. Mods, I expected better from you. I might have to start unmodding people or something. Yeah, I know. Tucker, maybe I'll have to make you a mod or something. It's multiple accounts? Okay. Alright, I'll give you guys a break. I'll take your word for it. I was talking about Whataburger. I was hoping Bean Dip was listening to that. Okay, but where was I? Okay, yes, to cooperate with God's grace, there's two main principled ways to do that. The first way is to have self-discipline, to be the master of your soul, the pilot of your disposition, the one who's ultimately in control. Self-discipline. And of course, like I said, fasting helps with self-discipline. And the second one is going to be doing good works. By doing good works, helping to feed the poor, by helping to clothe those who are without, clothe the needy, instruct the ignorant, things of this sort. By doing good works, you also help to cooperate with God's grace. And when we cooperate with God's grace is able to shine through us, so that then we can produce merit, and then we can grow closer to God. And it's kind of like this feedback loop. When we do these good works, God's grace helps. We cooperate with God's grace, and then we have more grace, and then through that grace we cooperate with it to do penance, and so then we go closer to God. And that is how you become a saint. And that, it's a lot of people think that, being a saint is only for people who are like priests or nuns or have devoted their entire life to Jesus. But no, anyone could be a saint. Anyone can go to heaven and perform heroic virtue on earth. It's just a matter of starting small. It's a matter of starting the small things and building your way up. So yes, and in fact, I think Saint Basil said that repentance without fasting is fruitless. St. Basil has this beautiful sermon on fasting. And he says that repentance without fasting is fruitless because we'll just fall back into sin. We'll just fall back into sin. And that is why fasting is very important. And abstinence is very important. Corporal works are very important. Prayer is very important. And so beyond just the partial indulgence you gain, you also gain, a closeness to God. You gain a callous to sin. Hopefully that's a way to say it. Is like a callous to sin. You're resilient against temptation. You're callous against temptation. And so the next time you're on the internet and you see something pop up, like some ad, perhaps you're pirating anime or something, one of those sites, with a lot of pornography ads, and if something pops up and it catches your eye, you're more likely to be able to click away now that you've built up this spiritual resilience. So that is why, fasting, these things are very important. And while the church wants to encourage us to do these things by offering us partial indulgences for them. Okay. Is there anything else here in the catechism I wanted to bring up? Okay, only baptized persons can receive indulgences. That's important to remember. You must be in a state of grace. You have to have the intentions to receive an indulgence. And you can only receive one plenary indulgence a day, with, of course, some exceptions. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say here. Okay. There is a great verse, and now I kind of wanted to talk about Bible verses that help to elucidate this concept better. And then I will... Bro, how do they have so many accounts? They really are trying to raid us hard tonight. I don't know. Did Rem Representative send his Wignat squad on us? I don't know. The brown shirts are coming after me. Is this like the night of the long knives? They're coming after me or something? I don't know. I'm not. I guess I'm not holding the line well enough on the on the reactionary side, and reactionaries are trying to go to war with me, take me out. I guess something. I don't know. The SS is taking me out. In any case, I'm going to try to focus and hopefully, yeah, I think I can set an automatic word filter. I think I can. I should do that. Let me try to do that here. That is a good idea. So I apologize for the interruption. For those who are watching on YouTube, our chat is kind of being raided right now with swastikas. So, yeah. So, yes. Let's see here. Display. No. Chat options. Here it is. Block terms and phrases. Okay. Oh, I got a bunch blocked. Okay, here we go. Let me just copy paste this and then block it. But then, okay, you guys are good at it. They're just Hindus? Is that what's going on? The Hindus are coming after me? Uh-oh. Set it so you have to follow for a certain amount of time before chatting. Oh, that's a good idea. How do I do that? I'm a little bit of a boomer right now. Could someone help me out? Oh, here we go. Follower only chat. I'll do 1 hour. Okay, that's a good idea. That was a good idea. Follower only chat. I'll do 1 hour. That was a great idea. Thank you, Oswald. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I appreciate the help from the guys in the chat. Very helpful. Hopefully the problem will be solved and we won't have any more issues tonight from these agitators. Agitators trying to distract me from talking about pious things. It's kind of telling about who these people are. I'm sure they'll have to, they'll be held accountable for trying to derail this conversation. So I'm sure they'll have to explain to God what the justification was behind trying to distract people from knowing more about how they can become closer to God through fasting and penance and other works, spiritual works. Okay, a great verse in the Bible in 2 Maccabees 12:41 through 46. And Maccabees is a book that you're not going to find in the Protestant Bible. It is one that we Catholics call the Judeocanonical books. I think Protestants called the Apocrypha. Apocrypha literally means like non-canonical, and obviously they are part of our canon, and so therefore we're not going to call them Apocrypha, but they call them that. And the reason why Martin Luther threw these books out is, and he used kind of the excuse that, the Jews no longer like these books. Okay, how is this possible? How is this possible? How did they do this? How are they violating the system? I set it to 1 hour. Followers only chat for an hour. Your viewers will only be able to post message in this chat or you're following for at least 1 hour. Maybe I should do more? Maybe I'll do a month. But then again, that might kick everyone off. Let's see. Did that change anything? I don't feel like they've been here a month. I don't know. It says the changes were saved. This is insane. I don't know what's going on. Subscriber only mode? I don't want to do that because that would probably exclude too many people. Test. Yeah, okay. Hopefully they go away, but this is not it's not an enjoyable experience being rated. Did Rem, are you behind this? Rem is a oh, I might have to restart the stream or something. That's true. All right. Well, let me try to finish up orthodoxy first. No, this is Catholicism. We're talking about Catholicism here, okay? Okay, thank you, Oswald. He says we'll just ban them. All right. Because yeah, it'd be a bit of a I don't know, pain to have to restart the stream, as then it'd be 2 streams, and then I have to edit them later, and I don't want to have to go through that work. I'm lazy. But I appreciate the mods. The mods are working hard tonight, so I love the mods. Thank you so much, mods. You guys deserve a pat on the back. Big shout out to the mods tonight. Thank you. And hopefully, Ram, if you're behind this, I'm going to be very upset with you, sir. He's like for those who don't know, who might be new to the channel, this guy's, he's been known to hang out in Wignat circles, so that is why he's a little bit suspicious. In any case, this is a great verse from 2 Maccabees, and it talks about prayer for the dead. And Martin Luther used the excuse, he threw these books out of the Bible, saying that, oh, the Jews no longer accept them. The reason why the Jews threw the books out is because they had a lot of messianic prophecies that they just rejected. And also, then the Jews used the excuse that, oh, they don't have the original Hebrew manuscripts, which doesn't really matter because they were in the Septuagint. Jesus, when he was speaking in the temple, he read from the Septuagint. That was the Greek translation of the Old Testament that the Jews were using, and that, included the deuterocanonical books. And if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. All right, so this is, the verse here. It says, and the context behind this is that there had been this battle between the Hebrews and some other group, and afterwards the Israelites, I believe that's who it was, they had these medallions that had the pagan gods on them. And so after the battle, they found a lot of these dead soldiers, and they had these medallions with pagan gods on them, which is, this grave sin in Judaism. And so this is what the verse says. It says, then they all blessed the just judgment of the Lord, who had discovered the things that were hidden. They discovered these, I think they're medallions. And so betaking themselves to prayers, they besought him that the sin which had been committed might be forgiven. But the most valiant Judas, this is not the Judas from the New Testament, the valiant Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves from sin, for as much as they saw before their eyes what had happened happened because of the sins of those who were slain. Again, they were slain after the war. They see that they have these medallions, and so they're all praying that this sin might be forgiven. And making a gathering, he sent 12,000 drachms of silver to Jerusalem for sacrifice to be offered for the sins of the dead, thinking well and religiously concerning the resurrection. And this is the most explicit verse that you can get about prayer for the dead. So we already see here they're praying for the dead, they're offering atonement, or you could say some form of satisfaction for the dead, for those who had sinned and therefore had some temporal punishment left. And this verse says here, for if he had not hoped that they were slain should rise again, it would have seemed superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. In the same way, it would have been superfluous and vain to pray for the dead if the dead automatically just went to heaven. If they just went to heaven, then it would have been vain and superfluous to pray for the dead. So clearly there was some purgatory, some place to be purged from, or to be cleansed from these temporal punishment. And there's also, this shows that there's a way to make satisfaction for those who've already died. All right. For if he had not hoped that they were slain, I read that one. And because he considered that they who had fallen asleep with godliness had great grace laid upon them, it is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, and they might be loosed from sins. So, Alright. What you heard there is that it's very important to pray for the dead. That's just a Bible verse reaffirming that. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. I see someone is talking about they're worried about going to hell. So I'd love to address something like that. Let me just address that at the end here. I'm going to just try to get through everything I have to say tonight about indulgences, and then I'll wrap it all up. I'm almost there. I don't want to have to break this up into 2 sections, so I'll just finish up tonight with some examples from the Bible, from the Old Testament, about kind of this idea of indulgences, of applying the merits of one person in satisfaction for the temporal punishment of another. And there's the example of Solomon, who he had worshipped the pagan gods of his many wives and concubines. He had 300 concubines, 500 wives? Ooh, he was really, he was a player, right? And so in 1 Kings 11 through 12, it says, "So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I command you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to the one of your subordinates." And here we also see an example of that God is a just God. He has to punish sin, not just on the eternal level, because there's been a disruption there, but also on the temporal level, the ephemeral level. There's been an imbalance. And so to rectify that, God would have to punish Solomon by taking away his kingdom. But then he says, "Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, King David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." Which kind of sucks for the son, but in any case, the point here is that the merits of David, the obedience that David had towards God, was sufficient so that God would offer a partial indulgence to Solomon, so that the kingdom would not be torn from him during his lifetime. Other examples include in Exodus, the Jews committed adultery, or idolatry rather, and then God says that he wants to wipe out the Jews. And so Moses says that instead that he begs God to have mercy on them and to instead do penance. And so he fasts for 40 days. And this fasting, basically, again, it grants a partial indulgence because God instead lessens the punishment by only sending a plague. And so some of the Jews survive, obviously. And then the last example I have here is in Romans 11. Paul talks about how the Jews were supposed to be punished for deicide, basically, because they killed Jesus and they're persecuting Christians. And so, they were kind of, they were just basically implied that they were supposed to be punished. And what Paul says is that because of their ancestors, this punishment had been tempered. He says, quote, as far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake, your enemies being the Jews. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. In other words, the patriarchs' merits had kind of tempered and remitted some of the punishment that was coming to them. I don't know. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything more about that. And then of course, we talked about the early church and how they would perform indulgences as well. Indulgences are, of course, something that is dogmatic in the Catholic faith. They're prescribed at the Council of Trent most explicitly, and they've been in the church for quite a bit. Now let's talk about abuses. Let's talk about the abuse of indulgences, and then I'll end it there. All right. The chat is spitting some very hot takes about the God's chosen people. You hate to see it, but when it comes to abuses, this is probably the most. That's probably the first thing that comes to mind. I would say they're like if I say the word indulgences around a Protestant, the first thing that comes to mind is the quote unquote selling of an indulgence, and I would start by saying one. An abuse does not give you an excuse to do away with something that is good. Indulgence is good, and just because the people that abuse it does not mean that therefore it needs to be abolished. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. As for example, in the city of Corinth, Paul writes to them saying that they are abusing the Eucharist. They were not performing it correctly. There was rampant sin. People are taking the Eucharist out of a state of grace. And for that reason, they were drinking the judgment of God, according to St. Paul. And so St. Paul gives them instructions on how to abjure their sin and to rectify their behavior. But he does not say, okay, just stop doing the Eucharist then. We're just going to stop that. We're going to create a new church now. No. He doesn't say start over. He doesn't try to create some renaissance and some new church, some renaissance or something of that sort. Instead, he says, this is how you're supposed to do it. Start doing it the right way. So that is like the correct way to address abuses and indulgences. But I should also mention that money as a token of thanksgiving for an indulgence is not necessarily or intrinsically evil. For example, a charity, they might have like coffee and donuts, and it's kind of like if you donate, then you get like a coffee, you get a donut. It was kind of like, that was kind of the original intent of having like a fee associated with indulgence, is that money would go to building a church or a hospital or to charity. That was what it's supposed to be for. And so people, to give thanks for the church granting an indulgence, they would give some money to whatever their means could provide to thank the church for being so generous as to give them this indulgence. And that is kind of where the trouble began because of what you might call simony. Now, simony is evil. Simony is when a member of the clergy, a member of the cloth, he will use his spiritual authority, he'll sell it to someone for some gain, monetary gain, for power, whatever it may be. But the gain has to be something that has, like, selfish for the priest or whatever, or for whoever the priest represents. And so that was kind of the case with Johann Tetzel. He would create these exaggerated performances saying that indulgences saved you from hell. Indulgences did X, Y, or Z. And so he did these exaggerated theatrical kind of events. I think he would like hold it. This might be Hollywood. I saw it was like a movie on this, but it might be in Hollywood, but it might have been real too. He held like a torch and it like burned his hand, and he was like, "This is what hell will be like for all eternity." And that scared people, and it scared people into giving money for indulgences. And to that regard, this is obviously an abuse. And for that reason, when Martin Luther called him out on it, he was put under house arrest. So the church, addressed these things. And even before Martin Luther, there was promulgations addressing abuses of indulgences. For example, and I have some examples here, Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 had put restrictions on indulgences, how they were used, to be used, and how the benefit ought to be applied. There were regional councils or local councils in Vienna and Ravenna. They did very similar things as that is the Fourth Lateran Council. Pope Boniface IX, he condemned priests in the Diocese of Ferrara who were exacting money in exchange for indulgences. Pope Martin V and Sixtus IV also condemned the abuse of indulgences. They wrote a lot about that. And then, like I mentioned, Johann Tetzel, he was put under house arrest. And finally, the Council of Trent banned all abuses of indulgences, and Pope St. Pius V made it clear that there could never be a fee associated with indulgence, is because the risk of abuse was just too high. So that has been completely taken care of now. The issue of abuse has really been kind of rectified. And now the issue is more that no one really cares about indulgences because they have this bad taste in their mouth, so to speak. They really don't think about them or try to obtain them or to I think a lot of people don't even know they exist or what they mean. And that is kind of what one of the purposes of talking tonight about the subject was to inspire in people, to excite in them a love for indulgences and excite in them a desire to be pious, to go to confession, to receive Holy Communion, to receive indulgences, both for themselves, for their loved ones, so that they can enter heaven faster, so that they can please God, so that they can worship God, so that they can help the church out by praying for the Holy Father. And so hopefully, you learn something new tonight, and hopefully you walk away with something concrete. Oftentimes we talk about very theoretical subjects here, very philosophical, or things that are not very grounded in something actual, but indulgences are very actual and things that you can start gaining right now as I'm speaking. And so it's something you should definitely look into. There are lots of books on them. I kind of just gave you a good introduction, but there's much more research that can be done. Read through prayer books, look for when it says, they often say a prayer before the crucifix. In my prayer book, it says, if you say this on a Friday, you can receive a plenary indulgence if the usual conditions apply, if it's said in like a church before a crucifix. So just keep an eye out for that. And yeah, that's kind of the main takeaway tonight. And I hope people take advantage of them. They should. And they should also do it for the right reasons too. Of course, probably the biggest one is because, it helps to inspire within you a love for the faith. And by performing the acts necessary to receive an indulgence, you also are strengthening yourself in the faith, as I mentioned. So, I think that's all I want to say about that tonight. Hopefully, you guys gain some interesting knowledge. And then I will read, what you have to say. Let me first check the entropy link here. And then I will see what you have to say about what your thoughts are. I wanted to address this since I see Big Bongo. He said he wrote this long message to me, and I don't have to have him repeat it, so I'll read this off now. My dad was a Catholic and an Eagle Scout. I'm not sure if that's relevant, but awesome for him. He was divorced 3 times and was an alcoholic. He died by suicide holding his rosary in his left hand. Will he be in heaven, hell, or purgatory when I die? If Christ has yet to return to earth, what can I do to help him? That's a great question, and there's a lot to unpack there. For one, my deepest condolences to your father. I'm sure that's very tough, losing a dad. I'm not sure how old you are, buddy, but it's very tough indeed to have a father who is in that state. But for one, I am incapable of adjudicating the eternal resting place of anyone. That's what Jesus meant when he says, judge not lest you be judged, is because I literally can't. I have no window into anyone's soul. What I will say is that that if someone is ignorant, in order to commit a mortal sin, you have to be completely aware that it is a mortal sin. It has to be grave, and you have to have done so willingly. I don't know the situation of your father, but if I had to guess, it sounds like someone who's been very troubled. He has a lot of issues he was dealing with his whole life. I'm not sure, he might not have been well catechized in a lot of these things. If he was clutching his rosary at the end of his life, perhaps he had some desire still to hang on to God, but perhaps mental and cognitive deficiencies caused him to end his life. I'm not sure. I don't know. What I do know is that God is very merciful, and that he is not going to hold people accountable to things that they are unaware of, or things that they had no control over. If your dead father had some psychological issues. That being said, yeah, he might be in purgatory for longer, because there still is temporal punishment for doing these things. But certainly you can pray for your father, and I'd recommend it. I recommend trying to get indulgences for him, and to pray for him, and then you'll never know for certain until you die, like you kind of mentioned at your particular judgment. But in the meantime, you can pray for him, and that's really the best any one of us can do, because frankly, even the holiest among us, we have no idea what they're struggling with. Even the most pious of people behind the scenes might be doing something completely wicked, or may have wicked thoughts, and so it's impossible to know whether they're in heaven or not. And so that is, one of the reasons why I do the show, is so that to encourage people to take seriously their faith. In fact, and that was one of the worries I had about America First being very prominently Catholic, is that oftentimes when Catholicism is expanded to too many people, I worry sometimes that it might become something of like a tool or a bat to use to beat someone over the head. And let me be clear what I mean by that, and then maybe people understand like where I'm coming from, is that it's very easy to become intellectually, I guess, dependent on the church and just say, oh, something like transgenderism, homosexuality is wrong because the Bible says so, and therefore I'll tell gay people they're going to hell. And while you might not necessarily be wrong, the purpose and point primarily of the Bible explaining what sin is to condemn ourselves, remind ourselves of our own shortcomings, our own ways that we've messed up, and why we need Christ and we need his church. And so I think it is important for me to kind of remember to emphasize that. And I'm not saying that they're wrong for calling out gay people and transgenderism. Obviously, they're right to do that. I'm just reminding people that you have to balance that with like Jesus said, look first at the log in your own eye before you look at the speck in your brother's eye. And this is something, so I'm intellectually honest here, so it doesn't sound like I'm trying to look in the specks in your guys' eyes. This is something in particular I struggle with a lot. It's very easy for me to look at the speck in someone else's eye and be like, oh, they should do this or that or the other. They shouldn't use that word. They shouldn't do this. They should be nice to that person, blah, blah, blah. And then I forget this giant, like, tree trunk that has just been, that is crushing me right now from the weight of my own sin, the weight of my own depravity, the way I have fallen short. And so it's a helpful reminder, I think, to discuss these things and why, one of the reasons why I do this show. Another reason is obviously to help to catechize people so that people who might be like your father and don't know that suicide is a mortal sin. It's a very serious mortal sin, can know that, and know the ways that they can get help through confession, spiritual help, that is. The psychological help, is probably something that I wouldn't be very good at, but spiritual help, a priest can extend through confession, and that's what we talked about in the preceding weeks. And then the last kind of reason I did this kind of like this type of show, this type of platform here, is just to kind of inspire people a love for the faith as well. I think it's, Nick Fuentes is a very cool guy. He likes to say I'm cool, but I think he comes off as a very Chad character. And so I think, it's very easy then to be drawn to Catholicism because, he's a Chad, he's Catholic, and so therefore I should be Catholic. And I actually don't think that reasoning is necessarily bad. I think that, oftentimes people are drawn to the faith because of the heroic virtue of saints. And that's not a bad thing at all if that's one of the reasons you want to be Catholic. But, you should also have a complete view of the church, which requires some intellectual catechesis and requires also some spiritual inspiration. And one of the things I just hope, and this is something that, I was struggling with a while, and I just hope other people don't struggle with it, is that the faith becomes something periphery, or, you have what defines who you are is like your political beliefs, your ethnicity, and then, your faith is lodged in there, and then maybe a few other things, your hobbies, you're good at lifting or sports or something like that. It's really easy to fall in that trap, but rather, the faith, this higher principle, needs to stand as the most concrete and most fundamental thing in our lives. Everything must be ordered from that standpoint of the faith and in conjunction with it. In the same way that in Islamic societies today, the government, the state is seen as like this appendage of the Islamic faith. In the same way in medieval societies, the feudal governments were seen as an appendage of the church. The same way that our lives must be seen as this appendage of Christ in ourselves, living within us, as I mentioned. To have always Christ at our fingertips is very important, to have this higher principle and is to be always the sole director of our path. So that is kind of, the purpose why I got into this. I hope I answered your question. I kind of rambled a bit, but that was a great question, though. That was a great question. All right, let's see what else you guys are saying. I find myself watching more religious programming lately, though. Maybe I'm going in the right direction. Yes, you are, if you're watching more religious programming. And keep in mind that, yes, that's a great suggestion. Also, being Depp, try to get masses said for him, talk to the priest. The priest always prays for the dead in the Latin Mass. And so you can just ask the priest to mention your father for prayers, because prayers for the dead are very efficacious, as we mentioned in the Book of Maccabees. Prayers for the dead are very efficacious. They're very important. And these prayers are like basically us doing penance for the dead. Okay. Mass, the holy sacrifice of Mass, is one of the most powerful ones. This is the most powerful prayer, actually. It is the most powerful prayer. And therefore probably one of the most powerful penances anyone can do. Martyrdom is probably another very powerful one, but that's a great suggestion, being done. Let's see what else you guys are saying here. I gotta read the super chats here. Okay, thank you to Nasuno. Thank you very much. Very generous, sir. I really appreciate it. He says, indulgence for cringe posting, smiling Pepe, lol. I don't know, were you cringe posting? Oh, I guess you always cringe post, so I don't know if I have, I guess I have the jurisdiction to offer indulgence for cringe posting, but there's not really, I guess an indulgence in this sense would be the equivalent of if, let's say, you did something wrong and I'm about to demote you, and then you say, okay, well, I know I deserve to be demoted. Nasuno, I kicked out the bot. I don't know what you were thinking, Nasuno, when you did this, but this guy, he kicks out the bot in our server. We have a music bot, and he got mad at the bot. It's like the bot's fault or something. I don't know, but he gets mad at the bot, and he kicks the bot out of the server. And he was a clear abuse of his power. And so, as punishment, I had to remove his rank, demote him for a bit. And so an indulgence would be as if I didn't demote you because Bean Dip Groiper is such a loyal and a great guy, and he always listens to the rules or something like that. That's what probably the equivalent of indulgence would be in our Discord. It wouldn't be me expiating your guilt or me forgiving you. It would be about more the punishment. Will I give you an indulgence for the cringe posting? I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. I don't know. No one has enough merit to cover for you, though. You cringe post so much. There's no merit in the world could cover for all that, big guy. I'm sorry. My jurisdiction does not allow me to apply any merit to cover for you. No one can bail you out. You've dug the hole too deep for yourself, sir. We have too many screenshots of you talking about liking black people's thighs and other bizarre kinks and wanting to be like a Shota or something. I don't want to get into it. But you've dug the hole too deep for yourself, sir. I don't think it's possible. But I will say to you, Nasuno, that we do love you and appreciate you, and the reason why we kind of we like to give you a hard time is because, one, it's fun, but for two, we also we like to encourage you to get better social skills, perhaps to grow. And so but we love Nasuno here on the show. He's come on many times. And so I want to make sure I balance out my criticisms with compliments here by saying that he's a great guy. He's probably the most loyal person to the show. Sometimes he goes in a little too much on the brown-nosing side, but he's very loyal to this show. He made a lot of the openings and closings. So yeah, big shout out to that guy. Bean Dip Groiper says, the fire of purgatory is the same as the fire of hell. The difference between them is that the fire of purgatory is not everlasting. St. John Vianney. That is true. That is kind of the Roman way of looking at purgatory. I will say dogmatically, the church has never said that. That's kind of, I would say, more St. John Vianney's opinion. And certainly opinion, I think, shared by many people. I think the only reason I bring this up is because I was talking to the Eastern Catholic priest, and he talked about his conception of purgatory, and he very much thought it wasn't going to be something like Dante's Inferno, and he kind of brings up the way that the East has seen it, even though they have the same conception of a place that you go to remit temporal punishment, but the way that he talks about it is a little different. And then he says, check out... Oh, thank you again, Bean Dip. Thank you very much. Very generous of you, sir. Tonight, I really appreciate the contributions. But yes, it certainly is a place of suffering, though. Regardless of whether or not it's going to be like hellfire, it is a place of suffering, both from physical pain, or some pain of some kind, and also the pain of loss, the pain of not being with God. And so, yeah, you want to avoid purgatory. It's a serious thing. Check out Gab, Vontae, crazy stuff. All right, let me link this in chat here. I have no idea what Gab Vontae is, so I better link this in chat here. And so people can check it out. Should I link gab.com/Vontae? I don't know. I heard it's a really great page. I haven't checked it out yet, but I heard there's a lot of inspiring stuff on it. I heard it was like some archaic finding. Like they got these archaeologists, they were digging through the archives. They were mining the archives of the internet, searching endlessly for the wisdom, the eternal wisdom. And then they found it. They found this gold mine, this collection, this deposit of just jewels. Every single quote of his was just like, it's basically a masterpiece. This guy named Vontae. And so it's all in his Gab. Apparently it's been long discontinued, but I heard if you go there, you can learn a lot of great things. Very inspirational. So, I don't know. Should I link it? I heard it was made by someone who was like 15. He must have had some really crazy experiences. In any case, I won't link it. I won't link it. You can look it up for yourself. Other people can link it if they want. I won't be the one to ruin Nasuno's career like that. Maybe, you never know. Maybe Nasuno's future wife is watching the show. Perhaps, well, actually, I don't think this guy's getting married. But perhaps, a future employer. So, don't want to ruin his life like that. Winston Fujimori, thank you so much for the super chat, sir. I really appreciate it, man. It's great to see you. He says, miss tonight's show. Been really busy. Have money. Hey, no problem, bro. I'll take the money. I'm glad you're able to catch some of it. I hope you watch the replay, though, because indulgences, I think, are probably one of the most important things that Catholics need to be talking about, because Protestants have basically created this stigma against indulgences, and so we have to overcome that through catechesis and by explaining what they are, and they're very beneficial, they're very efficacious, so definitely check out the show. You made the post before you met your wife to be. It's like the meme. This is what a no two-dimensional I don't know if I want to say that word. No two-dimensional woman does to a nibba. This is what no waifu does to a nibba. Alright, Italians are the best. Okay, any questions for me related to the topic tonight? Otherwise, we can move on to doing something else, I suppose. Stop censoring Nasuno, says American Grayson. Ooh, Nasuno is censoring. Maybe I regret making this guy a mod. Any other questions for me? Questions about indulgences? Those type of things. But yeah, I'm scrolling up here. Yeah, my deepest condolences to you, Big Bongo. Honestly, that sounds like a very difficult situation for sure. Martin Luther was a wise man. No, Morty, he really wasn't. Actually, if there was ever one character in all of human history who's a human, not like Satan, well, I could just make disappear, it would either be the guy who invented the printing press or Martin Luther. I haven't decided. It's a tough one, because both of those guys basically ushered in the class society. Thoughts on Milo becoming ex-gay? That's a great question. Milo becoming ex-gay has often been, I think, seen as a publicity stunt, something done. It's because he's like his grifter or something. I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not in a place to adjudicate that, and so I have to take him at his word. And so, I think that if I was in his case, if, for example, I was struggling with some sin habitually, and I'd turn my life around, I would want other people to accept me back into the church, especially, if he's very vocal that what he did was wrong. He's in no way trying to make excuses for it. He's dedicated his life to St. Joseph. I heard he's going to try to make a conversion therapy center. So I think he's doing his part to make penance. And it doesn't mean that we should be completely naive. Personally, I do actually trust Milo on this, only because, and this is kind of, I guess, a personal thing, I know a guy named Wagner Rocks, and Wagner Rocks is very close to Milo, and Wagner Rocks told me, I think it was either in our interview or perhaps just privately, I don't remember. But he told me like several months before Milo came out as being ex-gay or whatever. He told me several months before that Milo had stopped practicing sodomy. In other words, before he had kind of come out with this, before he had broke the news, before he was gaining any clout because of it or any recognition, he was already practicing what he preached. And so to me, that's kind of like a sign that he's serious about these things. I hope he is serious, and I will continually to pray for him. And we should all pray for him that he stays on the right course, straight in the narrow, and it, I think, is an inspiration to a lot of people who might be struggling with other habitual sins, because sodomy is not the only sin of the flesh which mutilates the intended purpose of our sexual organ, which perverts it. Masturbation is another one, and that's one I think a lot of people struggle with. Oral intercourse is another one. So those examples I think are ones people might struggle with, and so it's something that we have to be constantly reminded about the depravity of sin, and that we can overcome it through God's grace. Is it sodomy in the mouth of my wife? Yes, it is sodomy. If the whole thing is done that way, yes. I think it's like you have to be open to life. That's what the church teaches. When you have intercourse, you have to be open to life. Only engaging in oral is obviously not open to it. They can use a little bit of ambiguity, imagination as to how maybe you can include some of those things, but and still being open to life. But whatever. Thoughts on Divine Comedy? What are my thoughts on it? Mike Dante's Divine Comedy. He's not a theologian. I'll start there, and so you shouldn't interpret it as a theological work. The Melkite priest at the place I'm going to, he says that if there was 3 books that he could eradicate off the face of the earth, it'd be the Quran, the Dante's Inferno, and Martin Luther's 95 Thesis. He says the 3 of these have caused more confusion, more pain and suffering than anything else in the history of mankind. I don't necessarily agree with that, but certainly the concept of like being 7 layers of heaven, 7 layers of hell, notions of purgatory, notions of places where people who are virtuous but not Christian would go, and like I think there's like that's like the uppermost boundary of hell. There's like people who are virtuous but they weren't Christian, whereas the church teaches that people who are virtuous, they follow the conscience of their heart. If they're invincibly ignorant, they can go to heaven. So it's like it's a good literary work to study, but read a catechism, read the saints. Don't read Dante's Inferno or his Divine Comedy to get any information on that. Is it sinful to spite oneself simply to do harm to another? Give me an example of what you mean by to spite oneself simply to do harm to another. Yes, oral pee-pee suck is sodomy. Why wouldn't it be? The reason why homosexuality is wrong is not just because it's disgusting. The reason why it's disgusting is because it's wrong. That's the way it should go. But and God has given us a conscience. But it's because it violates the natural function of our sexual organs. Rather, I would say the natural function of sexual desire, because people can not have intercourse. They can be like priests. They can be celibate. Rather, sexual desire, the natural function of sexual desire is procreation. Otherwise, a species would be eradicated. It would go extinct. The same reason that the natural desire for hunger or appetite is to eat so that we live. In the same way that nature, and particularly God, we believe God is the one who ordered this, but you can even come at this from a naturalistic perspective, has ordered the humanity in such a way, and other species in such a way, is that sexual desire is the way we motivates ourselves to propagate and to regenerate, to continue ourselves basically in another human, if I kind of vicariously live on. Our ancestors vicariously live on through us. And so, of course, homosexuality obviously gets in the way of that. It is the perversion the natural function of our sexual organs, it would be like, if I had like a baseball bat, the natural function is, to hit a ball or to hit something, to make contact with something. And if instead I used it, I don't know, as like a stool or something like this, or something it wasn't intended for, then we would say, okay, this is not a very good bat. It's not being used to its proper end. It's just not. It's not good. And it's not good necessarily in a moral sense. There's no moral qualities associated with bats. There's moral qualities associated with rational human beings. But we just say it's not good in kind of like a utility sense. If it's being used as a stool, then it's not good because bat's not made to be a stool. It's made to be a bat. So, but there's much more I could say on that. Only hand holding until marriage? Yeah, pretty much. I actually just found out recently that making out is also prohibited. Is masturbation a sin? Yes, masturbation, yes. Oh my goodness. Did people not know this? Yes, it's the same type of carnal sin where you're abusing your natural function. In fact, Kant, and Kant's not a theologian, so you don't have to necessarily take this seriously, but Kant said that he thinks that masturbation is worse than something like suicide, because something like suicide at least requires some form of intelligence, and it requires some form of virtue, because, it might be done out of like, for some like noble reason, like if you're like a Japanese soldier or something and it's like better to die than surrender, it might be some virtue associated with it or something like that. Whereas masturbation is just, you're debasing yourself, he says, lower than that of the animals. The animals, as a general rule, operate according to instinct. Animals live their lives not according to some will, some rationality, something that like they don't choose between right or wrong, or they don't have any type of self-consciousness that they think, oh, this is what I'm going to do, but I could do this. No, it's just like everything is just syntax. It's just input X and you get out Y, input this appearance and they get this one. That's how they live, and so they live simply by instinct, and instinct as a general rule would compel animals to not masturbate because it doesn't promulgate the species. And so everything is towards that end with animals. And so for humans to do something that would be unnatural is to debase yourself below that of the animals. To debase yourself, to strip yourself of your innate human dignity, to treat yourself not as an end, but rather to treat your body as a means, to just try to expropriate pleasure from it, rather than to treat it as something that has dignity and worth, and since that is made in the image of God, or we are endowed with rationality. And let me write this: have you ever converted an atheist? If so, how do you do it? I don't believe so. Not to my knowing, at least. I've talked to atheists before. I think I impacted him to make research it more, but that was like back in high school. How do you convert atheists? Well, atheism is kind of like a spiritual deficiency, I believe. The same way if like a psychopath is someone who just doesn't like have a sense of the moral law, or a sociopath doesn't have like a sense of the moral law. I think the moral law is innately written on our conscience. In the same way, I think that a belief in God is just innately written on our conscience. I think it's like properly basic, you could say. And I think you should say cursory view of history. You can see that like every society has believed in God, and every society has believed in actually a very similar God, interestingly enough, even pagan societies, which is one of the reasons like I study world religions and Shinto, so I can see the similarities. But in any case, I think it's like some psychological, psycho-spiritual deficiency, and that you kind of have to address that first before you can like convince them through some intellectual process that God exists. And so for those people who maybe don't have the deficiency, and so they do kind of believe in God, but they just don't intellectually know they believe in God, so to speak. In other words, they live life as though there was a God, but they're just not like really aware that they believe in God, if that makes sense, kind of like this agnosticism. Then I think it's good to present them these intellectual arguments about the existence of God. I think that might be very convincing to them. But for those people who are not like that, who just suffer from the spiritual deficiency, I don't know what is going to convince them, given the fact that there's so many arguments for the existence of God, so many arguments for the existence of God that I don't even understand because they're like above my level of expertise when it comes to things like modal logic. Like look up online Gödel's proof for the existence of God. Sometimes they call it the mathematical proof for the existence of God, or the proof from logic, and try to understand it. I'm someone who took three quarters of logic classes, upper division logic classes, and it's still very difficult. I took modal logic class, I took predicate logic class, and just like trying to follow it is not easy at all. And yet there's like these very sophisticated proofs, and yet people want me to assume that all of them are false. Because to be an atheist, you have to assume that every single proof for the existence of God and every potential proof for the existence of God would have to be not true. And the only way I could see that as plausible is if you're God and you have omniscience, you're omniscient, and therefore you know everything, and you know all the proofs, and you're able to debunk all of them. So I see atheism as fundamentally just rooted in irrationality. And like I said, I think it's some psycho-spiritual deficiency. And how to correct that? I don't know. I'd have to look up how to correct, like, how people help psychopaths and that, and maybe that would give me some inspiration, but I'm not sure. It's a great question, though. I'll think about that more. Maybe I'll get back to you. Probably through prayer. Maybe just like say, try praying. Try creating some connection with God. At this question, I'm convinced Oswald says, at this point, I'm convinced these questions are bait. That was a good question, so regardless if it was bait, that was a good question. King Royp says, anime writus. And let's say Italian Stallion claimed a waifu on my wish. Okay, this is probably a bait. Nasuno pretended he wanted to get her from him, extorts me for another waifu. We can test. Then when okay, I'm not gonna get involved in your petty disputes when it comes to waifus. You guys have to work that out for yourselves. Okay, I'm not going to intervene there. I'm sorry. I don't want to have to like try to judge people's intentions. Adjudicate that for yourself. You're all adults. Yeah, Coomers go to hell. Yeah, Coomering is a mortal sin. It's like it's pretty obvious. I don't know why people would not know that. What about nude beaches? What? I don't know, man. If it's like after the fall, man clothed themselves because they knew that our bodies were sacred and they had dignity. And then our temptations will often cause us to strip us of our dignity or strip other people of their dignity by treating them as some object of our appetite instead of as someone who's endowed and rational and made in the image of God. And so that is why clothing is keep secret. You kind of make something scarce, make it unavailable, inaccessible. And that's the thing that we do about a lot of things that are valuable. It's why women should veil at Mass. It's because their hair is a symbol of beauty, according to St. Paul. So it should be kept secret. It should be veiled so that it becomes more valuable. In economics, we talk about like if something is scarce, if something is the supply moves to the left, the price goes up. It becomes more valuable because there's less of it. Winston says, is mercy killing a sin? Like if someone fatally wounded or terminally sick and untreatable pain? Yes, it would be because you're killing someone. Only God has the power to take life. Vicariously through natural processes. God can take life, but yes, that's like, and basically that's just euthanasia is what you're asking. Yes, euthanasia is sinful. It's a violation of our human dignity. You can't commit murder. All right, life is full of suffering. Yes, we live in a very imperfect world, unfortunately. Only God can bestow life, only God can take it away. If Adam and Eve were the first two humans, how did the world get populated without incest? There was incest. I think there's just a lot more genetic diversity. There's a lot of biologists and geneticists who are Christians who have written about this, I think. I don't know their work, but I know that the people have written about this and how it's possible. They just trace, I think, Adam and Eve back a lot farther than 6,000 years. I'll just say that. I think William Lane Craig did a whole series on Genesis I saw on YouTube, and he traces it back to like some distant ancestor of humans, and that's how I think where he kind of draws like this would be like the Adam, where Adam and Eve is, and then go from there. Is Eve a waifu? Okay, not a serious question. Blank beaches are different than hedonist beaches, though. They're very European. I don't know, man. I don't live in Europe. I don't know what a nude beach is. It just sounds like a place where people go to look at people naked. So if they're going, I never saw my wife's hair until our wedding night. Yo, based. Oh, well, that's so based. European coomers and the nude beaches. I know, I'm like, what in the world? This is these topics. Okay, I think that's enough for the recording. Any other last minute questions related to theology, related to what we discussed tonight? Then I will, let me check the entry link, and then we can talk about, I guess, more casual subjects. We can vibe. Are Methodists as woke as Protestants? Posting their L's on Twitter makes them out to be. Methodists are Protestants. Protestantism is like this overarching umbrella that includes anyone who believes in the five solas: sola scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia, sola dei, and what's the other ones? I don't remember. Well, grace alone, scripture alone, faith alone, Christ alone, God alone. I forget the last one, but sola scriptura is self-contradictory. Sola fide is nowhere to be found in the Bible or the Church Fathers, really. Same with sola scriptura as well, and it just doesn't even make sense. Why would it be the case that the Bible is the only thing inspired? Why would it be a book that was codified in like 981 AD at the Council of Hippo in Carthage? Why would that be the place in which, finally people have the Word of God? When the ancient Jews and all other civilizations have always transmitted their holy books and their holy text orally, so that it wouldn't fall into the hands of the ignorant, vulgar, licentious populace who might take it and distort the true meaning of the Holy Scriptures, in the same way Protestants basically have. As Jesus said, cast not your pearls before swine. It's one of the reasons why I don't really care if the Bible is in the vulgar language. Some people should not be reading the Bible. That's something I kind of learned growing up. That's the final red pill, is the people question. Some people should not be literate. Some people should not be thinking too hard about these things because they don't think hard enough. They're not smart enough. They're not educated enough, and so they come at things thinking they know everything. They think they know. And I'm thinking about like the midwits on Reddit. They think they know what they're talking about, and they have no clue what they're getting into. The new atheist types. And it's because of this confusion, this distortion of knowledge that has led so many souls astray. And it's just a sign of the poor times we live in. But yeah, things should be kept secret. And in fact, at the Council of Nicaea, originally they had no intention of writing things down. The only thing I think they wrote down ultimately was going to be the creed and some like their pronouncements. But there was one, I forget the guy, but he wanted to write down all the proceedings, all the debates, and they said, don't write it down, because if this falls in the hands of, the common man, they may take it and they may misunderstand it. And this could lead to great scandal because we're discussing, a big heresy. Someone could take a quote from one of the council fathers and use it to justify some heresy. And so we want to avoid that. Don't write anything down. It'll just be passed on. And we just have the creed and that's it. And that's how they went through it. And that's how the liturgy was passed down, is just orally. And it wasn't until later that they started writing things down. Monks started writing things down to keep it. To keep kind of like a uniform system. They started having to write things down when the church expanded to a point that you had to start unifying things, otherwise you'd have local customs that were just so divergent that they needed to be brought back to the essence of Catholicism. And also, of course, during the Dark Ages, a lot of pagans that were pillaging places, and so they wanted to try to keep records in case things were destroyed. Well, yes, that's... When you think about like the caste system, though, it kind of makes a lot of sense too in that context. About there's some people that are just made, they get enjoyment from working blue collar jobs. There's some people who get enjoyment from being leaders. There's some people who get enjoyment from learning things and being educated. And they form different castes, different classes of in society. Yeah, Bing Bongo says, thank you, Enemy Rice, for answering my question. Please pray for my dad. His name is Thomas. I absolutely will, sir. I'll make sure to think about him in my rosary tonight. I'll definitely pray for his soul, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, like women, very true, Admiral Hipper. I was thinking about just everyone in general, but women is kind of like, unless they're like a nun or something, I don't know if they need to be literate. Winston says, I know they're Protestant, but are they really that woke with the trans stuff? I guess suddenly become political, feel free to ignore since you're on Lent. Oh no, no. When I say I'm fasting from politics, I mean the current news cycle, not politics in general. Like I can talk about theory or something, but the news cycle, I'm not going to talk about politics. But what was the question again? Are they woke on trans stuff? Some of them I think are. I think I remember I've seen like LGBT flags from Methodist churches. There's the thing about Protestantism is, again, it's infinitely divisible. There's not like one Methodist church. There's several, and they all operate slightly differently. There's some that like reject homosexuality. There are others that accept it. Same with the Presbyterians. I think even evangelicals, non-denomination, those are going that route too. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're heretics. Don't be a Protestant. I don't see why anyone would. I don't see any justification for Protestantism. It was created 500 years ago. It's 500 years old. The Catholic Church is 2,000 years old and can trace its roots all the way back to the early church. The Eastern Orthodox Church can as well. Like, that's the only, like, I see discussion is between us and the Orthodox. Protestants can convert or yeah, they need to convert. I'll just say that. They need to convert. I wish Hellfire had known that they should convert. Yes, we'll be praying for you, Big Bongo. I'll remind the Discord probably tonight to pray for your father, because yes, I absolutely I would never I try to presume what it's like to lose a father. I'm sure it's very difficult. So I will definitely pray for you. Okay, I think that with that I will end now our discussion on YouTube. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, I apologize to the YouTube watchers that I haven't uploaded in a while. It's mainly just because I've been kind of busy with finals, like I said, and so I haven't taken the time to edit a lot of my other clips, but I will, and I'll try to upload those on Penance and Confession, but this one I should be able to upload pretty quickly. So, alright, thank you to the people watching on YouTube.